David, I know you do this most days, but could you just briefly tell us how you went from being the poster boy for smoking to being the poster boy for anti-smoking?
Well, it was one of these epiphanies that a lot of people have for whatever reason. It wasn't spiritual. It wasn't anything cosmic. It was just, the problem that I had was watching my brother, who was a little bit older than me, dying from cancer. And I had the unfortunate pleasure of going to visit him at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute up in Boston, Massachusetts, watching him and a lot of other people dying from a product that I was being paid a lot of money to make glamorous and macho and tough and rugged and all that stuff. It kind of dawned on me at that point when I went home that my son was begging me to quit because he said, "You're going to die like Uncle Bob, aren't you?" Because my brother happened to have been a smoker as well. That kind of hit me with like a ton of bricks because here I was at the time 39 years old, thinking about my mortality, raising kids, trying to be a good role model for them. But here I was out there on the billboards and magazine ads making this product that I knew was harmful from the time that I was a kid, but I went ahead and did it anyway, primarily because I justified it with the fact that who would turn down $100,000 a year to sell a legal product? So as an actor and as a model and as a stand-in photo double for Harrison Ford, having been on commercials and soap operas, it was a job. And it only became a job until I found out that what I was doing was immoral. Not only we knew about tobacco scientifically and, politically, and, that's 20-some years ago, people weren't talking about tobacco unless you died of lung cancer or heart disease. Once in a while, the Surgeon General would come up and with his report, say that tobacco kills and we need to do more. There was really no coalition. There was really no, groups getting together other than those who were fighting the people diseased and now affected by tobacco, which was American cancer, American lung, American heart. So make a real long story short, because it was a long, over-involved story of a couple of years where I tried to quit. And once my decision was made to quit while I was doing the ads, it became a predicament for R.J. Reynolds, who had hired me because,
yeah, of course, yeah.
Because no one had ever come out against the tobacco companies before from the inside out. The Surgeon General could talk about it. It was always speculated that tobacco was bad, but here I was, the only person that had come out in 1988 saying that the tobacco companies do indeed target kids, which is what made me the golden boy for the then newly forming anti-tobacco movement, so to speak.
And the first people you started working with then back in 1988, 1989, along with the kind of the governmental organizations like the American Cancer Society, they were which people in particular?
Well, the Office on Smoking and Health, which was being headed up by Ronald Davis, Dr. Ronald Davis, who eventually became the president of the American Medical Association and died last year of pancreatic cancer. And he had brought me down to Washington, D.C., or Rockland, Maryland, actually, to tell my story to his group of people who were trying to come up with new regimen and new routines to get the word out there about tobacco, because there was no real coalitions being formed. There was no money, really. There was no funding available. I then got called in to work with Matt Myers, who was an attorney, who's now the president of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. He brought me down to Washington to hear my story because no one had ever done what I had done. So I hear for these big wigs, these high, powered, medical people, lawyers, legal people, policymakers. Here's this little bimbo, me, who came in from the cold and started telling his story. And the problem with telling my story was, people were believing me, but nobody knew what to do with it. I mean, what do you do with this information? So I became the golden boy for all the news people, and I was on television with Peter Jennings, and who's now subsequently died from lung cancer, and Sam Donaldson and Dan Rather, and I became I was just all over the place, and everybody was believing me, and it was getting the tobacco industry certainly upset. When I had told my story to Matt Myers, all I was asked to do was go out and tell my story publicly to kids, because I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't an epidemiologist or a politician. I was the guy who was paid a lot of money to get kids to smoke.
And so the thing you decided to do was go out and go around the schools and speak to the kids. That was your decision. You thought that was probably the best way to go about it.
That was my decision. In the first year and a half, I couldn't get anybody to pay my gas. I was so passionate about trying to undo the damage that I felt. Because here's how it went, Chris. You know, when you admit you did something wrong, it's pretty hard to not feel guilty about it when you believe what you did was wrong. Okay? And it took me a long time to figure that out because, like I said in the beginning of this conversation, there's not even you, no matter how passionate you are about something, if you're an actor, you can justify it. I don't have to go out and commit murder to play a murderer on stage, okay? To me, it was a game. The game that I was playing was I happened to have been the rugged type that R.J. Reynolds wanted for this particular search and rescue campaign that apparently worked because we moved Winston from number 4 to number 2 in sales. The problem that I had was once I admitted to my kids and everybody else that I talked to that it was my job to get kids to smoke, the more pissed off I became at myself, okay? The more angry I became at myself that I was no better than the tobacco industry I was bad-mouthing, okay? So I became very, I guess, middle of the road. I wasn't anti-smoking because I had friends who smoked, and I had smoked from the time I was 13. You know, I had friends who didn't smoke, but that didn't mean we hated each other. You know, so I was getting involved with all of these people who were the beginning stages of what is now known as the tobacco control movement, and I was the one that helped perpetuate all of the things necessary, but my job was always to keep it around kids, okay? Because I knew the marketing strategy was toward kids. I knew they needed 3,000 to 4,000 kids every day to start replacing the people who quit or died. I knew that I wasn't against smokers because I wasn't an anti-smoking zealot. I heard all of these doctors and lawyers and professional politicians saying we need to do more, and I agreed with them. We did need to do more. You know, since my brother was dying of cancer, cancer was rampant in my family, I was certainly high risk smoking 2.5 to 3 packs of cigarettes a day, okay? You know, and I knew that what I was doing as a role model was not good, and being a good father of 3 kids, hopefully I could undo some of the damage that I was doing, but I never intended to become an anti-smoking zealot. That has never been a part of who I am, and that's why my anger today is I'm just livid at the fact that now I'm guilty by association because of the people who are in the anti-smoking or anti-tobacco movement who are so vindictive and hateful, and they just have made tobacco users feel like lepers, and that's not the answer to the problem that I know I was involved in. In 1994-95, all right, when they started talking about the master settlement, and once in a while you'd see a blurb on television, you know, that they're trying to get money with Michael Moore and they're trying to get the attorney. Nobody knew what was happening. Nobody had a clue what the MSA was, okay? Nobody understood that the 4 states, including Florida, Mississippi, Texas, and Minnesota, okay, were the 4 states that were going to come up with a $40 billion settlement and set a precedent for the rest of the nation, okay? It was all under the radar, under the grid. Nobody knew anything about it. When I talked to somebody about it, they looked at me like I had a third eye in the middle of my forehead.
Yeah.
So when I saw the corruption begin in 1994 of the anti-tobacco movement, of which I was a part of, kind of like the guy who helped build the atom bomb and then regretted it later, that was my feeling. I helped create this monster, and I'm under the grid, but I'm still privy to all this information, and I'm still asked my opinion. I was still the headliner in the anti-tobacco movement when it came to speeches and keynotes and, you know, trying to raise a level of awareness. I'd been interviewed. I was ABC Person of the Week with Peter Jennings. Every major newscaster, including Ted Koppel and Dan Rather, interviewed me, called me up, wanted my opinion. I gave it, and then they did nothing with it.
Right. Now, when you talk about the corruption of the MSA, I mean, some people listening will want me to ask you, what exactly you mean by that.
Well, the corruption is basically you had 2 people, Matt Myers, who I was a friend of mine at one point, and you had Mike Moore, the Attorney General, who came up with a brilliant idea to recoup all of his Medicaid losses from his state and decided that he was going to try something that had never been tried before. He got 18 or 19 other AGs to back him up and say, hey, we have a chance of getting some of our money back because right now we got more crap against the tobacco industry than we have ever had before, meaning lawsuits were starting to be filed. So they figured, let's go after it now and see what we can do. Now, I don't think they intentionally went out and did it intentionally to screw Americans, okay? I think they went out trying to find a way to see what sort of loopholes there were with R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris and Liggett and Lorillard and Brown Williams. What can we do to help create peace? Just like Steve Parrish wanted for the CEO of Philip Morris. He wanted peace. He knew it was going to happen after the Cipollone case and after the other lawsuits. He knew that the precedent had been set and that shit was going to hit the fan. Pardon my French, but that's basically what was going to happen. So they started to talk, but they didn't want anybody to know about it. I certainly think that in 1994 and 95, when all these negotiations were going on, this should have been held out for public scrutiny. We should have known as public what was going on with what could have been and turned out to be our nation's biggest hoax, okay? And that was the initial settlement of $385 billion before McCain got involved and before Orrin Hatch got involved, before Kennedy got involved, before it got shot down by the White House, which I'm sure you're aware of what happened, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, your research has been brilliant, so I know you know what I know. But here I am living this, okay, watching it, and I'm trying to figure out what in the world is going on. What are they trying to do? How in the world can you ask them to give up all this money for prevention, intervention, cessation, and all the things that we want to do? And you're going to now limit the liability against the tobacco industry, who's done all this and has gotten away with it. This was before the RICO thing, before the racketeering. How can you let them off the hook? So my friends, who I thought were my friends, I'm not getting calls. I'm asking questions, and I'm trying to stay on top of things so my program is in real time, okay? I didn't want to keep talking about what I did in the 80s. I wanted to talk about now what's going on with tobacco funds, with tobacco taxes. How are we trying to help the people we initially set out to try to help, meaning the smokers, okay? But what was happening, it was becoming a war, okay, against the tobacco user rather than the people causing the problems, in my opinion, okay?
Right.
So I'm no longer in the loop, okay? And since 1994, 95, 96, in those areas, they weren't calling me for my opinion anymore because I was no longer relevant to the problem. Because now the tobacco companies admitting that they did target kids, okay? Now they're admitting that they did falsify information. They are now admitting that the criticisms were really true, and therefore they have to be held accountable. So they even let Peter Jennings into the factory at Philip Morris to see what was going on and how tobacco was blended and cured. Okay, so my story is no longer relevant to them. I certainly helped them get to where they were, okay, with my input and my honesty and my integrity with the media in all the 7 years or 8 years of whatever it was in the beginning. I then was like the red-headed stepchild.
Well, no, it seems to me that you were still very relevant to any cause that wants to reduce smoking. Having somebody like yourself going around schools and speaking to literally millions of children is presumably going to serve that aim. What it seems to me that happened in the 1990s, just as you got involved with this, is that they moved well away from education. And a more prohibitionist element began to dominate,
right.
And I think.
But you know what? You know why, don't you, Chris? Because all the monies now that were coming in, all right, from I'm not talking about the MSA because that didn't happen until 1999. 98 they decided, but 99 the money started to come in. In those years between 94 and 98, they were building some sort of forum, and that was now to say, hey, this is no longer going to be about health. It's going to be about money. That's what I saw. That's what I'm talking about, the corruption. Every attorney general that I talked to in every state and every governor, okay, said that this money that they're trying to get since 1994, and 19 of them originally agreed, then it went up to 46 in 1997, all right, and then the White House backed down, and then 98 they got 240 billion or 206 billion added to the 40 billion for the first 4 states. Okay, that money became the motivation. No longer from 96 to 98, 99, health was not the issue, and that's when I saw tobacco control go from bad to worse.
And this money, I mean, you argue quite rightly. I think everybody agrees that most of this money never went towards tobacco control activities, but. I mean,
but we were told that it was.
Yeah,
okay?
sure. Yeah.
As a public, we were told, but the public didn't know what was going on. So they were doing anything they wanted to because nobody had gone out, since we didn't have congressional consent to even come up with the settlement, all right, which is now why it's being touted as unconstitutional, and we're trying to get it shot down, and I'm going to be the first one in line to try to get the MSA shot down because of exactly what you said.
But I mean, obviously some of the money did go towards tobacco control. I mean, I think you would probably get most people in the anti-smoking movement would agree with you that the money from the Master Settlement Agreement, not anywhere near enough of it went towards what it was supposed to go towards. And we should make it clear that, as you said before, you're not dependent on this money. You have no particular axe to grind because you personally are unaffected by it. But what it seems to me that happened throughout the 80s is they moved completely away from education because they tried education. It worked to an extent, but there were always going to be some people who would smoke. By the mid-90s, you had an anti-smoking movement which was well represented in government, made up of people who didn't just want to educate and inform people, they wanted to reduce smoking to zero. And so, your work was appreciated, I'm sure, by them, but that wasn't going to be the whole answer. The money that was spent, I mean, money still came from the Master Settlement Agreement towards tobacco control, but that money was spent on research into secondhand smoke and, campaigning, or, not campaigning because they can't call it that, but advocacy for smoking bans and other restrictions and tax rises and all the other tobacco control policies, which are, as you would say, against the smoker rather than against the product.
Well, basically, when I was involved with the Tobacco Master Settlement, okay, when I was hearing what was going on, there was going to be 4 criteria. That's all the attorney generals wanted, and the governors, okay? All they really, really wanted to talk about was tobacco prevention and control of spending. They wanted to talk about the taxes and how they were going to, tax cigarettes. Then they wanted to know about how we're going to control youth access, which was going to be enforcement by the law, and then smoke-free air, clean indoor air bills. Those were the 4 things that everybody was talking about because that's what the public was really concerned about. The public really wasn't concerned about research and development. We had enough medical data to prove what we knew to be true about the possibility that if you smoke or chew tobacco for a long time, there's a real good chance you're going to prematurely get diseased and die. Okay, so that was common sense, okay? But when all this money started to go into all the new consulting fees, all the new programs, and then they're saying, well, prevention doesn't really work. And I'm talking about the anti-tobacco movement. These are the experts coming in and say, well, you really can't educate kids because they don't really listen. You can't really teach prevention because you really can't track prevention to see if it's really working. So now we're going to spend, $1 million on Kiss Me, I Don't Smoke buttons, okay? We're going to spend, $500,000 on T-shirts, okay? We're going to spend, all we were doing was perpetuating the myth that tobacco control was really putting health above the financial end of it. And that's not what happened. That's the corruption that I'm talking about, Chris. From the inside out, they used this money when they could have used more money for prevention. The most amount of money that was spent by any one state, with the exception of Washington State, because that's the best state in the country. That's the best state when it comes to tobacco prevention, education, clean indoor air, taxes, and access. Those are the 4. They spend all of their tobacco money on health-related issues. That's the only state that does that. Every other state, Oklahoma is putting it in a trust fund, and they're living off the interest, okay? There's 13 states have taken their tobacco money and reinvested it in tobacco stock or tobacco bonds so they can now use them as securitization. So everywhere you turn, and every state was different, is what's now causing the stink that I'm talking about. And the stink is that... Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, a lot of people, presumably in the anti-smoking movement especially, would say that anything that increases a tax on cigarettes is a good thing anyway, regardless of where the money went.
I don't think so at all.
Why not?
I think we just keep hurting the smokers. I think we just keep hurting and causing more stress and not being fair and rational and logical with the smoker.
But they always say, okay? I mean, you're a guy who's involved in the youth aspect. They always say that a 10% increase in cigarette tax, it results in a 7% decrease in usage. These kinds
I don't
of
believe
statistics.
it. Kurt, I don't know if you believe it, but I don't believe it. I see kids all the time, and I talk to kids every day. And I was down in Georgia, and I had 500 kids in one room. And I asked them, How many of you believe a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, or 17-year-old can buy tobacco illegally? They all raise their hand. How many of you smoke or chew, and nobody raises their hands but 3 or 4? But then you ask how many of you think it's more than 35 to 38%. They all raise their hand. Okay, so I think the surveys and I think the evaluations and the results that are successful that the tobacco control is touting are lies. If everybody who started to use tobacco was 18 or older, you wouldn't hear a peep out of me, Chris. I would keep my mouth shut. But when I know that majority are being replaced with teenagers going through the roughest time of their life, which is adolescence, okay, that's the problem that I have. I have a problem with a store breaking a law and selling tobacco illegally to a minor. I have a problem with that. And will a smoker say, well, they're going to get it anyway, there's worse things they can do? No. There's not a whole lot of worse things that a person can do when it comes to tobacco. And I miss smoking every day, Chris. Every day of my life, there's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't wish I could put a cigarette back in my mouth and inhale deeply and enjoy it. Because I was one of those people who did enjoy it, okay? I do not believe for a second that tobacco companies care about kids, and I don't believe that the tobacco control movement is doing enough about it to stop what we know is true, and that is they are still targeting kids and marketing kids because they have to. I think the media doesn't care either. I mean, we're talking about a series of problems here. It's not just the tobacco companies. It's not just tobacco control. It's not just the zealots. It's not just the pro-smokers and chewers. It's the whole attitude we have toward this thing, okay? And the people who are smoking and the diehard smokers who will never quit, I think they should have a right to keep smoking in the privacy of their own home if they're logical and smart enough not to blow it into the face of a 3-year-old with asthma. Okay, that's all. I'm trying to use.
What about the right to smoke in a bar?
Absolutely, they should have a right to smoke in a bar. Abso-freaking-lutely. All right, only because children don't generally hang out in a bar. Okay, I have a choice, and I've seen all the blogs, and I've read all the hate, and I've read all the vileness about smokers being lepers. They're not. They have a choice to make, and that is when they're ready to quit, should they ever want to, they should be able to get the help necessary because we helped get them to start when they were younger, probably. So we have an obligation there. Bars should be a place where a smoker should be able to go and have a drink, have a pint, have a six-pack, whatever, and smoke his or her cigarette. Absolutely. And
so where do you think the line is drawn when it comes to government action, when it comes to actually making things illegal? You hinted there that you think that some bans on smoking in public places are good things. I mean, is it that you think it's better that people don't smoke in public places, or should there actually be a law against it?
I think that people should use common sense, but we know that people don't. Okay, and if you're going to a restaurant, and we know that smoking sections aren't necessarily the best places. You know, it's like asking for no chlorine section in a swimming pool. Okay, it's just there's no such thing. Okay, there's no non-smoking section.
So you would be in favor of a law against that?
I would like to see all public places where kids will go and pregnant women. They should be able to go in and eat a meal, or or watch a movie, or be in a lobby waiting for entrance to something without having to breathe somebody else's smoke. Yes, absolutely. But I think bars should be a place where a smoker should be able to smoke. I think their own private homes, because they're the ones that are going to have to face their children like I did. Okay, my children are still alive, and I smoked in front of them for 18 years, okay, while they were growing up. They're fine. I don't believe all the crap that I have to read, okay, on blogs about, the science that goes with it, and I understand what we need to do in Mount Helena out in Montana and Scotland, and I read all this stuff, and I just can't take it anymore, because we've lost the rationale to this, and that is treat people with dignity and respect. Once you turn on them and try to dehumanize them and make them feel like lepers, you've got yourself a war, okay? And unfortunately, with a war, there's got to be participation. And all you're hearing in this tobacco war is the loudmouth anti-smoking zealots, the wackos, the grab bag full of nuts that are there, and you have the extremists on the pro-smoking side, okay? I work with people who smoke every day of my life. You have never seen me waft their smoke back at them or say, pew, get out of my... I've never but they respect me enough to know my position that they don't smoke around me, okay? That's their choice because we have used common sense, we've used rationale, and we've used logic and love and compassion. There's none of that in the tobacco control movement, and there hasn't been for the last 10, 12 years that I'm aware of. They're just greedy people whose egos are out of check, who are now going to be funded for the next 15 years, according to the MSA. They don't care. They just don't really give a crap anymore. And now we see all these new things that are coming up with harm reduction and more money being spent, in other areas rather than what I feel should be spent on, and that is prevention and education. With good common sense prevention, not showing black lungs and clogged. I don't do that. I've never done that in my life. And that's why I'm going to go on YouTube. That's why I'm going to do my own tobacco control for kids, because I'm not going to get the accolades and the pats on the back and the support and the sponsorship from the tobacco control movement, because I'm effective. And they don't want me to be effective, Chris. They really don't. And I'll say that to Matt Myers, and I'll say that to anybody who asks me. They don't want it to be successful. They could care less because it's about money.
Well, this is an interesting area, because some people would say that the anti-smoking movement has become a prohibitionist movement, whereas other people would say that there's so much money involved now, particularly because of the Master Settlement Agreement, that they can't afford prohibition.
Well, I think right now, if I think they're saying they want prohibition, but I don't really think that they believe it. Okay, I think what they really, really want is the knowledge of the fact that if they are threatened by losing this MSA money every year, every 6 months, however they're paid, however money's put in escrow, with all the stuff that's been going on, with the now lawsuits by the tobacco companies who are going to try to shoot down the MSA, okay, that's scaring a lot of people, because a lot of the attorney generals in some 40 states, not 46 or 50, but 40 states, they're nervous as hell because this money is now at risk, because the MSA truly, and I've talked to anybody who's everybody, including some AGs in private, that the MSA is unconstitutional, okay? Because of the compact clause. The compact clause, you've heard about that, right? Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, that no state will enter into an agreement with another state without congressional consent. That's exactly what 46 states did. They came up with an agreement without congressional consent, without any legislation, without any law to back it up, and then what did the tobacco company do? And this is where the smokers don't understand their side of it. Their own tobacco company, who they are trying to, gather around and rally around, they raised the price of cigarettes within 48 hours. 48 hours. They raised the price of cigarettes over 50 cents a pack to now handle this lawsuit.
Without a vote. I mean, that was an illegal tax rise, was it not?
Yes, it was, absolutely. But the tobacco companies were in cahoots with John McCain and Matt Myers and Mike Moore and all the other attorney generals, saying, we're going to raise the taxes, okay, across the board, and now we're going to let the tobacco users suffer the sin tax.
And it's easy to see why you've parted ways with a lot of these people, because they want to destroy the tobacco industry. You don't want to destroy the tobacco industry. They want to put it up tax. You don't want to put up tax. They want smoking bans everywhere, indoors and outdoors. You don't. But don't you fear for your career? I mean, your job and your love is doing what you're doing, going out to all the schools, and you must have seen what's happened to people, even people like Dr. Michael Siegel, who no one can lay a finger on, really scientifically, or in terms of, no one can pretend he's paid by the tobacco industry. I mean, you're a man who at one time, of course, was paid by the tobacco industry.
Right, and then I was paid by the other side. So I'm in a conundrum, Chris. Who's the enemy here? Who am I really fighting? Well, I'm not fighting anybody anymore. I'm tired of fighting. I'd rather just educate, and I'd rather put the word out there so people, 1, 10, 20, 500 at a time, will hear my common sense and logic. Because smokers are never mad at me. Smokers don't get pissed off at me, Chris. Other than when I do a blog, if I did Michael Siegel's blog one time because I wanted to say how upset I was, well, I just got ripped up one side and down the other.
Yeah, well, why do you think that is?
Well, because they're so angry, they just think I'm another scapegoat. I'm just another anti-smoking zealot who's trying to pry into their life. And so I don't blog, I don't talk. I need to have my story told by somebody like you, that's why you and I got in touch. I mean, I got in touch with you because I read your excerpts, and you seemed fair. You weren't hateful. You weren't angry. You were trying to get answers. That's all I'm trying to do. You know, when science gets debated, they got an ego problem. Well, that's all science is, isn't it? Somebody who asks questions, that's what science is. And when I ask a question, I'm like Michael Sigel. We're told to shut up. We're no longer, worthy of discussion because we don't agree with them. That's the corruption.
Do you follow the scientific side of it much? Are you interested in that area?
I'm very interested in it when it makes sense to me. But when you get a Stanton Glantz out there, and when you get all the other people out there, and I read your stuff, okay, and I like to look at things from Velvet Glove, Iron Fist. I like to see that. I like to see. I mean, I don't read blogs about anything other than Mike Sigel's. I get a lot of education from Michael. I think he's brilliant. I think he's got an attitude problem because he's forced to have one, because he's always defensive, because people are out to get him.
He's getting attacked from both sides, isn't he? That's
same
as you will, I think.
But I don't want to be attacked by both sides. That's why I've laid low. That's why. I don't know what you heard about me in your research and when you were putting your stuff together, in your book together, but I have been out there day after day, never a break, okay? But my love has always been kids, and I always thought that if a book was ever written for the sake of kids, not against the smoker, or not against tobacco control, not against the MSA, not against McCain, not against Matt Myers, but for the sake of kids, I would have a win-win situation. Because I was telling you before, Chris, I have never, ever had a problem face-to-face with a smoker in one of my programs. And I know a lot of the teachers and the 6 to 7 million kids that I've talked to, never once has a teacher come up to me and confronted me. Everything I have said, they agreed with, they understand, because I took a different approach to an old problem that always seems to make a smoker feel worse. Not in my school programs, but in every other program. They're offended, they're harassed, they're treated like lepers and second-class citizens and child abusers, and that's what tobacco control is calling them, and I refuse to be a freaking part of that. Okay?
So you think, I mean, maybe this is a silly question at this stage, but you think that a lot of people in tobacco control now simply hate smokers?
Yeah, I think they do, and I think they just hate it because they've convinced themselves that they're winning this war, and there's no war, because I think the tobacco control movement is constipated. I think it needs an enema. It needs to be restarted, regrouped, and reformatted, because I think it's lost its meaning. Okay, I think they intentionally started out with a program and a plan to maybe get the word out using people like me and Victor DeNoble and Ricky Bender and Janet Sackman and the 4 or 5 key premier speakers that were out there, because we had a personal attachment to the issue.
Well, but maybe David, perhaps it was you who was naive. Maybe it's always been about prohibition for a lot of these people.
Oh,
you just didn't realize it.
Absolutely. But I'm telling you about how naive I was, because I was just so passionate about what I did and loving kids and getting the acceptance that I was getting. Yeah, my ego was out of check as well, Chris. I've never denied that. I was no better than they were for the longest time. But my naivete is that I think the majority of these people, it was about prohibition. And now I can say that about Matt Myers, and I can say that about Ron Davis, who's no longer with us, and all the other people, the Stanton Glances, and the hateful people that just put information out with junk science and the lies that they put out there without any sort of accountability whatsoever. Yeah, absolutely, you're right. I think it was.
A lot of these people, you mentioned Stanton Glantz a few times. I mean, you've met most of these guys.
I've met all of them.
And the Stanton Glances. How do they strike you? What kind of people are they?
Well, right now, I think they're some of the most obnoxious, egotistical people I've ever met in my entire life. We're talking about the Michael Percheks, the Mark Percheks, the Cliff Douglases, the Matt Myers, and the Simon Chapmans. All nice people when I first met them, because it was new. Okay, it's like a honeymoon. When you first get married, everything's good for a while, and then their true colors shine. I went to Australia with Simon Chapman. I went over to Taipei, Taiwan. I went to Sweden. I went to Canary Islands with Patrick Reynolds and Michael Cummings and Stanton Glantz and all the people that were anybody. I was a part of this. So, of course, my ego was out of check, too, because here I'm now gallivanting and carousing with all these people who had PhDs after their names and MDs, and all I was this lowly bimbo who was paid a lot of money to make a product look good. So I'm feeling pretty damn good about myself. And so in the beginning, I was pretty proud to hang around these people that I thought were just some of the smartest people I ever met, because they were making sense, until I started realizing that a lot of the stuff they were saying was made up. Okay, a lot of the stuff, the numbers they were coming up with, and I'm not real statistical.
What kind of things are we talking about here specifically?
Oh, statistically, they were talking about, like when Greg Connolly up in Massachusetts was saying that his state was so successful in, controlling tobacco. I'm like, you're full of shit, okay? I said, you're talking about these kids, they've reduced smoking from 29% to 16% amongst teens. I said, where the hell are you getting these numbers? I started asking these questions, so therefore I was now being pushed in the corner like a prostitute in confession, how dare you ask us these questions? We are scientists, we are academics, we are educators, we are professional politicians. We know no, you don't, because you're not seeing the kids like I'm seeing. And I'm questioning these people. Where are you getting these numbers? It's like, don't ask, just go out there and do your thing, You just go, do your funny show. You do your funny show, So no longer was I a part of what I thought was going to create a change of attitude toward tobacco. And that's my problem. So for the last 7, 8, 9 years, I've been all by myself. Nobody wants to talk to me anymore because they know I'm right. Nobody has anything on me. There's no ghosts in my closet. The only thing people can say about me is that now I'm just pissed because the attitude toward tobacco control isn't going the way I want it to go. Well, yeah, they're right. But I'm not pissed off at it. I'd like to see it changed. And I would like to see the smoker be respected. I would like to see the tobacco user who would want to quit, who would like to quit, to be treated with dignity and helped if they want to by a government who has the money to do it, but still is charging them $50, $60 a month for a patch, making it more stressful for a smoker. So I can watch the science to answer your question, but this is no longer about science, because people, in science, Chris, that 1% margin of error people will hold on to, because science is not 100%. Somebody says 100% of the people who smoke are going to die from, no, that's not true. 100% of the people who are 500 pounds or more aren't necessarily going to die from obesity. Okay, it's not true. So there's always that margin of error, which is what the tobacco user is hoping for. Everybody always invariably will say, well, my grandmother smoked till she was 80, and she smoked every day until she was 81 or 82.
Yeah,
well,
there'll always be people like that.
Yeah, well, I know somebody who crossed downtown Manhattan traffic blindfolded in rush hour and survived, but you line up 10,000 people, how many are going to drop, So the common sense and logical factor is no longer a part of tobacco control.
Does that apply with the second-hand smoke issue? I mean,
no,
will a certain number of people who are exposed to cigarettes for 40 years die, or not?
No, I don't think so. I think those numbers are made up. I think the 52,000 people that everybody, the numbers jump all over the place. I've never heard a consistent number in my 15 years of talking about it. It's 40,000, then it's 52, then it's 55, then it's 47.
Well, it never goes down. That's what I know.
It never goes down.
No matter how many people quit and how many smoking bans you have, the number of people who die.
That's right. It never goes down. So that's what I'm talking about. The numbers are made up. Okay, and when I tell these people that I want to see the results, and I'm supposed to be on their side, they question me like I'm some sort of a Benedict Arnold. I'm the one who's turning my back on it. How dare I ask them? They're professional. How dare? That's what pisses me off. How dare I ask? Well, I ask because that's how I learn. And if I'm not learning something that I feel comfortable with, I need to know why, because I'm a why person. And I believe when you ask why and somebody challenges your question, that they have something to hide. And that's what I've been seeing with tobacco control for the last 10 or 11, 12 years. They've got something to hide because Michael Siegel has the balls enough to stand up and ask questions, and now for some reason, he's a traitor, And I find that to be offensive, and I think Michael and somebody like me and some other people out there who have common sense approach to this thing, we need to band together somehow so we can help people like you who has an understanding of the program and the problem, and research is fresh for 3 or 4 years. You must be so frustrated to see what has been going on, and how do you put that into pen? How do you put that pen to paper, okay? Well, you put the pen to paper by telling the truth. from people who have seen it, lived it, not just who are now speculating and suspicious of it. And that's what most of the tobacco control people are. They're speculative, they're suspicious, and they don't have a freaking clue what they're talking about when it comes to prevention, in my opinion.
But David, surely you're going to carry on doing your work in the schools?
Yeah, well, my story has not changed, okay? My passion has not changed. I still think tobacco companies, even though the tobacco industry has admitted that they target kids and they say that they are being restricted from doing it in the future, they're still doing it, and we know it. Anytime you advertise a product, enticing, encouraging, and luring new users, you have to know who the users are, and everybody knows the users are the kids. So they can say they're not targeting kids all they want, but I'm telling you that that's what they have to do in order to replace those who quit or die every day.
Just reminds me, I mean, just using the word users there, we've spoken before, obviously. I think you told me a couple of years ago in Maryland, they stopped using you as a school visitor because you were, quote, a former user?
I was down in Maryland. I was there almost 8 years. I think it was 7 or 8 years in a row. I lost count. But I would go back every year in December and talk to every 7th grade student in 13 schools in that county of Maryland, Frederick, Maryland. And after 7 years, all the money that the tobacco companies were paying to the state of Maryland for prevention and education, for some reason, they were no longer going to have money accessible for speakers, especially speakers like me, who were former users.
And this was a policy across the board.
That was a policy. Not
just users, but former users. So half of the country, at least.
Yeah, they would not use anybody in their programs for tobacco prevention who was a former user. Like I was an addict, okay? And I understand
that is incredible.
So yeah, it is incredible. That's why I threatened a lawsuit for discrimination against the governor and the attorney general. The Attorney General, who was a new Attorney General from when they settled with the MSA back in the 1990s because they had a change of power, okay, told me that absolutely they found that they only want to use different kinds of programs with a positive attitude rather than an addictive former addict. That's what he said. He called me a former addict rather than a user.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, do you think this was just an excuse to get you out for some other reason, or?
Yeah, I think it was.
Or was it just extremism?
No, I think it was a person who was in control of the money. Okay, didn't believe that my program was effective, even though they brought me back in the schools. Not one school didn't want me not to come back. But when they found out I wasn't coming back, I was getting all these calls, so I called the person who hired me, and she said, I'm embarrassed to say they wouldn't hire you because you're a former addict. And I said, well, what about the last 7 years? I was a former addict, too. And we have proof that tobacco education was working. We have proof that my programs were effective. We have proof. But then I sound like I'm sour grapes, you know, like, no, they don't like me anymore, you know. So it became personal against me as a former tobacco user, which made me very offended. So I called some of my friends, and I said, do you still use former tobacco users in your programs? They said, well, they're starting to, tighten up the belt, and there's probably not going to be money available to talk to high schools this year, but maybe next year, So I started getting, through the grapevine that I was being, slowly pushed aside because no longer was I relevant to their agenda.
Well, this is almost like original sin, isn't it? I mean, yeah. People have got used to smokers being discriminated against,
That's
but
right.
now it's former smokers as well.
That's right. That's right.
Just one other question is, we're, 10, 11 years through the Master Settlement Agreement now, which originally was designed to last 25 years. It looks like it probably will continue more. I mean, with all the legal things going on in the States at the moment, what do you see the future of that being?
Well, I would like to see the MSA shut down, and I would like to see every penny given back to the tobacco companies so they can reduce the taxes on the people who are addicted to tobacco. Now, that doesn't sound like a strong tobacco controller, okay?
It doesn't, no.
Okay, but that's what I believe.
I mean, this is billions of dollars. Which if they had to give it back,
billions of dollars.
And that's what bankrupt some states, wouldn't it?
That would cause a big problem because over the last 10 years, all of these governors and attorney generals who illegally got this money, in my opinion, to begin with, because of the compact clause of the Constitution, that they didn't have congressional consent, the statutory language of the agreement between tobacco companies and tobacco control people was written down on napkins. The public had no knowledge of this. There was never any public discussion in Congress. There was never any public hearings made. So to me, I think there's going to be enough of a fight against, and I'm willing to join that fight too, to help call the MSA unconstitutional, which is really going to tick a lot of the people off who were my former friends in tobacco control. Because I think tobacco companies, being caught by the short hairs the way they were, having to come up with $246 billion, which was still a hell of a lot less than what they would have had 3 years before had the White House signed off on the legislation to control tobacco the way they should have, in my opinion. All right, and then then the prohibition would not have continued.
But what about the argument, David, of the greater good? You must hear this from some of the
what say again
you speak to. The greater good, that sometimes you can do a bad thing for the right reasons. I mean, you talked before about how you don't really think that secondhand smoke is particularly harmful to people, and yet you're in favour of certain smoking bans because it might help reduce smoking, and it also makes some people's lives more. What isn't it? Doesn't the same apply with the master settlement agreement?
No.
Anything and all the rest of the policies they're fighting for at the moment. If it reduces the smoking rate, isn't that the main aim?
Yeah. Well, okay. A couple things. First of all, I don't think that anybody should smoke around a child. Okay. Now that I've told the smokers for the last 20 years of my life, you go outside. Don't. If you're going to be in a car, stop, pull over, go out and have your cigarette. I don't think a child should be exposed to secondhand smoke. Okay. Even because my kids had asthma. Okay. I was smoking in a car, in a house. My kids had asthma. They had ear infections constantly. So I believe that secondhand smoke can be harmful to a child while their lungs are developing, while their sinuses are developing, while their eardrums are. Yeah. Once you're an adult, okay, once you are grown up, I believe that if you want to smoke in public, in a public bar, you should be able to, but not in a public place where children go. That's always what I've said.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, but I think you appreciate that a lot of these smoking bans have been brought in with the main intention of reducing the number of people who actually
prohibition. Prohibition
so
has never worked. It hasn't worked for alcohol, and it hasn't worked for other illegal drugs. Okay, prohibition has never worked. We've seen it. We've tried it. It doesn't work. Let's try something new, and that is common sense. Okay, higher taxes is going to maybe stop a few people. Okay, I stop a few people. Okay, every time I go to a school and do a program, I know for a fact that I reach 5, 10, 15 kids who will never smoke because of what I said, because my program, to me, and I've been told, is effective and it's worthwhile and it affects kids, okay? Why not put more money into my kinds of education that's funny, that's humorous, it's logical, and it's real time, and it makes sense, okay, rather than prohibition. I don't prohibit anybody from smoking around me. Higher taxes don't work. Prohibition doesn't work. Telling the truth does in a way that brings people together rather than separating you morally. Or
I mean, one criticism that people will probably make, I mean, on any side of this argument, people will always use the idea that it's all motivated by money.
But
people, I mean, you're there saying that you think that education is where the money should be spent, and people will say, "Well, of course you do, because that's the sector that you're working in."
Mm-hmm. Well, they have a point. They absolutely have a point. But it's the same thing with HIV and AIDS. If I happen to have been a person who was diagnosed with HIV or AIDS, okay, and I'm out there trying to promote good health and protection and all the other things that go along with not getting AIDS, should I be criticized for trying to tell my story? And that's what it comes down to. You're either going to believe me or you're not. And you can look at my income and I can do a disclosure, and you'll see where I've made less than $50,000 a year talking to kids all over the country, being away from my family, traveling all over the country by airplane, by train, by automobile, sleeping in my car. So if somebody wants to bring me on and look at my IRS statement, I can laugh at them right in the face and say, you got me confused with Matt Myers and John Bonsaff, and you got me confused with Alan Ball, because that's not who I am. So I say bring it on, not in an arrogant way, but yeah, I have nothing to hide.
It can sometimes be a curse or a blessing for a writer not to meet the people that he's writing about. In my case, I've spent the last 3 or 4 years writing about people I've not met at all. But you've met quite a few of them. Do you mind if I just reel off a few names and just give me your impressions of them? You met former Surgeon General Koop a number of times.
Yes.
How did he strike you?
I think he's an intelligent man, but I think he should have gone with the MSA before it was shot down. I think he made a mistake with David Kessler, and I think he made a big mistake, and I'll never forgive him for it.
Okay. Alan Bloom was from Doctors Order Care, one of the first people you got involved with, I think.
Alan Blum is a pretty smart guy. I think he's excitable. I think he's telling the truth. I think he knows what he's doing as far as his statistics and what he's saying to be true on the medical side. But I don't think he has a clue how to reach kids with an approach that makes sense. I think he's too fanatical, and I think he's a revolutionary for the wrong reasons.
Okay. John Banzhaf, did you meet this guy?
Yeah. I met him in Washington. You're talking about from ASH, right?
From ASH, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like him. I think he's an egomaniac. I think he's a Michael Moore wannabe, meaning the documentarian, taking on all these issues. And I personally think the man should lose 50 pounds before he starts talking about somebody being overweight. That's my opinion.
Okay. Simon Chapman, the Australian guy, edits Tobacco Control.
I think he's putting too much intellectual information out there. I think instead of common sense approach, I think the intellect is overwhelming for people, and he's turned off by people. I'm turned off by him, and I'm in the movement. Okay, as far as the issue, and I'm not interested in what he has to say because I think it's just over the top academic and intellectualizing.
Right. Jeffrey Wigand, you good friends with him.
Jeffrey Wigand's a good friend of mine, a very, very dear friend of mine. We see each other every couple of years at an event somewhere. Totally believes that kids shouldn't smoke. Really believes that with all his heart. I think he got a little affected, as I would have if they did a movie about me. Okay, I think he became a little expensive, a little pricey, but I think the value you get from a Jeffrey Wigand is worth it. I think he's got a ton of information. I'm not sure where he's been in the last year or so, but I do know that I've traveled around and either been there before him or after him, and people have liked his approach, but we're different people. He's good with the corporate, the executives, and the businesses, and I'm good with kids.
Okay, and finally, I think we've maybe covered him already, but Stanton Glantz of Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights. And in fact, what do you think of Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights as well? We haven't really mentioned them.
I don't listen to a thing they say. I don't read anything about them. I don't keep up with it. I don't like their attitude. I don't like their approach. The people, I don't know if Julie is still there or not.
Julie Carroll.
Julie, I'm not interested. They haven't used me when they could have. I asked why. They never gave me a reason, so I just think it became personal.
Yeah, okay. Right, just a final question. We haven't got much time, but I was going to ask you finally, how much hope do you have for the future of the tobacco control kind of reeling itself in from this extremism and going back more to the information and the education that you're involved in?
Well, I think the tobacco control ship has sailed. I think it's done too much damage. I think now with the new legislation that's coming in and the FDA, being involved in controlling a tobacco product, which I think is absolutely asinine. I think that the FDA is supposed to control drugs that are good for you, prescription drugs, over the counter. I think the FDA getting involved is just going to make this matter even worse. I think now with the new announcement today of the Department of Health and Human Services, the new legislation that's being introduced by Steve Byer, who's a congressman in Indiana today, they're trying to come up with this new Youth Prevention and Tobacco Harm Reduction Act. I think it's absolutely absurd to have this legislation introduced by a congressman from a state that has failed in all areas of tobacco control in the last 6 years. It just makes no sense that these people are doing this. So I have no hope.
If you're being attacked by both sides, then you must be doing something right.
Well, what I'm doing right, okay, is telling the truth, and that's just so wonderful for me because 20 years from now, when I'm 80, 75 years old or whatever, you don't have to remember the truth. The truth is always there, okay? And that's why when I told you the other day before yesterday, when these lawyers wanted me to lie,
yeah,
I couldn't do it. For my own, I could have made a lot of money. You know how much money I could have made becoming an expert witness for these people when they were had it gone a different way? I chose not to. I never chose to put money above my rights to be able to tell the truth.
Yeah. Can you just tell me about that? When they ask you to lie?
Oh yeah, these lawyers, I mentioned their names: Jack Baldwin, Don Loudon, Ron Motley, Dickie Scruggs.
Yeah.
The other guy, I forget his name, there was a couple other. They told me, basically, that whatever I had to say, just tell the truth, and if you have to embellish it, go ahead, because nobody will ever know.
And where was this?
This was Ron Motley down at Ness Motley, down in Charleston, South
for depositions?
And yeah, they were preparing me for the depositions. The other attorney, her name was Jody Flowers. They had me do my program in front of the entire audience so they could see what kind of an expert witness I was going to be,
right,
to try to get this, because they wanted to have the settlement before it went to court.
Yep.
And every state, including Florida, Mississippi, Texas, and Minnesota, they never had to go to court. It was all done prior, with depositions, with the threats of this is what we're going to do if you don't settle with us. Okay, and I was in every lawsuit.
Right.
I was in every deposition.
And you were there, you were just going to say the stuff about what you knew about the tobacco marketing practices, how they aimed marketing at children, and so on.
The young, the poor, the black, and the spook.
Yeah, that was a standard thing that you would say in these depositions.
And I could, and again, like my conversations with you, a lawyer would ask me one question, and the lawyers would prepare me by saying, "Look," and this is funny, because the one lawyer was mad at me because I just couldn't focus, because I had so much information that I had like diarrhea of the mouth,
right?
And
that still wasn't enough for them. They still wanted you to just go a little bit further, even if it wasn't true.
Yeah, they wanted me. Here's what they said to me. They said, "Listen, this is a game of fish. You ever hear of the card game Fish?
No.
Somebody asks you for a 4. If you have a 4 in your hand, you give it to them. Somebody asks you for a queen. You don't have one.
Yeah.
You say go fish. Okay. So what he told me was, and this was Ron Motley from Ness Motley, one of the $1 billion lawyers. He said, "Listen, you got to shut your mouth." He said, "If they ask you for a 4, you give them a 4. You don't give them a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, Jack, Queen, King."
Yeah.
Because that's what I do. I just don't answer a question. I tell a story.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And that's where and that's a problem for lawyers, because they don't want a story. They want the facts. Okay.
Yep.
And for me to tell the facts, there's always a story with those facts, which to me makes it more interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some context.
So I had to be prepped. I had to be told by these attorneys that when they ask you a question, you give them what they answer. Yes or no, this or that, but you don't add to it, okay? Which was a problem for me.
Yep.
They did say that when you're at the end and you're allowed to speak freely, you add in anything you want to, even if it's a lie.
Really?
Yes. Yes. Okay? And it wasn't just the one attorney. But they were trying to make...
What kind of things do you think they wanted you to say?
Well, they wanted. Well, I had mentioned to them that they were doing studies about marketing with colors in malls for kids.
Right.
In other words, the tobacco company would hire a PR firm. Okay, the PR firm would go to a mall, and they would put these machines up in the mall and invite kids over. It was like a car race, like a video game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where they would look into this thing and they would be able to push a lever, and you could drive a car, and you would have to step on a button or a pedal. When you would see a color red on a billboard,
right,
or a color green, or it was color boarding. That's what they were doing. They were trying to see which colors would be most effective on a billboard to a child. Okay, so that's what they were doing in marketing of Winston cigarettes, which had a color pattern of red and white and blue.
Yeah.
Okay. Marlboro was just red and white.
Yeah.
Newport and Cool was green and white or turquoise and white. So they had a very specific scientific study for coloring, for behavior, for being able to connect quickly what colors are most effective for a child.
Okay.
And they did it with children, not adults, but children.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted me to specifically say that they do it for adults. And I said, I don't know, because there was only children. Well, you have to tell them that it was strictly for kids.
Oh,
I said, well, I can't say that because I don't know if they're going to test grown-ups. How would I know? I'm not a focus group. I'm not somebody. I'm just telling you what they told me. You know, so it was always he said, he said, he said. But they didn't care if I embellished it to the point where I just kept it for kids and never mentioned grown-ups, because they were going after the tobacco industry in their marketing strategies for tobacco to kids. Now it's new one is the light cigarettes versus the full-flavored cigarettes.
Yeah.
You know, is a light. So I was involved in all of this stuff, and my testimony was based on what I was asked to do, and I just told them point blank, well, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to make it up. You know, if it happened, I'll tell it. If it didn't happen, don't ask me to say something that wasn't there. Don't make it look better than it actually was for your agenda. Well, this is a funny story because I was invited to go out to Santa Fe, New Mexico for a tennis tournament. And the tennis tournament was called the Emphysema Slims Tennis Tournament, which was a spoof on the Virginia Slims.
Organized by Alan Blum, I guess.
Alan Blum from Doctors Auto Care, or Doc. Chris Fletcher was the local doctor out there from Santa Fe. He invited about 12 celebrities out there, and I was one of them, and we were going to play tennis. It was going to be a tennis tournament, which was a spoof against the Virginia Slims Tennis Tournament, as I said, the Emphysema Slims Tennis Tournament. I was out there with Matt Perry and Stephanie Kramer, another actress, and Mariska Hargitay, who's on CSI here in New York, Law and Order here in this country, and we were all pretty much low actors. Nobody was really a big, huge star, but we had been seen, and people knew who we were. It was that kind of a thing. So we played tennis for a while, and when we went to the hotel to meet for dinner, I was standing in the hotel with Alan Blum and several of the other actors, and we were going to dinner, and there was a woman came in, and she was pushing the baby carriage, and she happened to be smoking, and Alan Blum said, you go over there and you tell her to put that damn cigarette out in front of that child. And I said, well, first of all, no, I'm not going to do that. I've never done that, nor would I do that. I think it's wrong and fair and inappropriate. Matt Perry was there, who he hadn't been on the TV show Friends yet, but he had done a couple things with River Phoenix and a couple other shows. And we went to dinner, and Matt Perry was getting so antsy because Matt Perry was a smoker. So at the dinner table, if you can imagine 25 or 30 people sitting at a dinner table in Santa Fe, okay, we're an anti-smoking Emphysema Slims Tennis Tournament spoof against Virginia Slim. Matt Perry gets up from the table, walks outside in front of the full view of the window, and lights up a cigarette. Alan Blum went berserk because Matt Perry went into the bathroom first and said, I need a cigarette. He told me. I said, well, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
And then the guy by the name of Richard Crenna Jr., who was another actor's son, who was with Mersh, he had to have a cigarette. He went out and had a cigarette. And within 5 to 10 minutes, I don't know if I told you this whole story, but within 5 to 10 minutes, 6 or 7 of the celebrities who Alan Blum had brought out to Santa Fe were outside smoking.
And what was Alan Blum like by this stage?
Oh, he was livid. I mean, if you've never seen Alan Blum is a very skinny man. He's very thin, gaunt. He's got a huge handlebar mustache, which is like 2 inches thick, and he was so red, and he was so furious, and he was so angry, he couldn't see straight. But it was too late, because we had already been there. We had already had our tennis matches that day. We had already had the press who was trying to now do anti-tobacco stuff, and I was proud to be there because it was fun. I got a free trip out of it, number one. Number two, I thought their cause was good, and the cause was to raise the level of awareness so kids wouldn't smoke.
So what are all these smokers doing it?
Huh?
You what?
Well, the 6 smokers who were there under false pretenses came out there because there were actors trying to get some free trip, okay?
Oh, really?
But when it came down to it, they saw how ridiculous this anti-smoking event was, because they were hooked, you know. And instead of hiding it like children, like you do when you're 13 to 16, they went outside and they pretty much said, "Screw this." Matt Perry was the first one, and Matt Perry will be the first one to tell you that he went there because he's sorry he ever started.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, dude, I'm hooked, you know?
Yeah.
And if and when I can quit, I will. But nobody's going to tell me how to quit and when to quit. It'll happen when I'm ready, which I think is with the whole premise of what you and I are talking about.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Should and if somebody wants to quit, they should find the wherewithal and the help to get the necessary, you know, motivation to get them to where their goal is, but not through denormalization and banter, you know, and badgering and being aggressive and hateful. Chris, is that not that we don't agree in philosophy. I still see tobacco companies scrambling to get kids to replace those who will quit or die.
I hold no brief whatsoever for the tobacco company.
How angry do you or I have to get before somebody listens to us? What do we have to do to raise the level of this awareness proportionate to the havoc that you know, and I know it's going to wreak somewhere down the road? What do we have to do? Either use humor, an expose? Do we have to lie? Do we have to make a spin about this thing? What do we have to do to cause the American people, the European people, the British people, the German people to understand that people who are out to use them for financial gain doesn't give a shit about them, okay? So when you know that, and I know that, and you're going to write about that, and I'm telling you it's happening because I have proof to back it up, what do we have to do to make a reasonable, fair analysis of what you're trying to put across?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only way I would put it is that I'm not a doctor, I'm not involved in public health, and I'm not involved in the anti-smoking movement, so really I don't care that much whether people choose to smoke or not. Once, like you say, once they're 18, I don't really think it's any of my business. I think it's very important, the same as you do, that people have accurate information about the risks, and that they take those risks seriously and realize that it means them and not just somebody else. Because I think
you're playing the devil's advocate, which is great.
Well, I'm not playing devil's advocate. It's just that I'm not involved on that side of it. So it's not really, my job doesn't depend on bringing the smoking rate down. As an historian, I'm only interested in the truth, and the truth is that for a long time the tobacco industry was way out of line. And they still are, but they were worse in the old days. And now it's the anti-smoking movement that is way out of line when it comes to telling the truth. And that's all I'm interested in. Now, whether... I don't really hold this idea that the ends justify the means and you can tell a lie, and you know, if it does good, then actually that lie is only a white lie. I don't care about that. I just care about what is factually, historically, the truth. And that's all my books say.
Then you and I are allowed to lie.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Well, basically, I think what we need to do is bring this to full circle, you know. And I know I've talked from, you know, a couple thousand words. That a couple words are important, but I do have to tell you that I am done with tobacco control as it is today. I am finished. I will no longer work in tobacco control the way it is defined today through the American Legacy Foundation or the Campaign for Tobacco for Kids. I want nothing whatsoever to do with them. All right? I didn't know 21 years who I was cooperating with. I had no idea what their goals were going to ultimately be. I was lied to. I was sold a bill of goods that I could do what I had to do for the sake of kids, and they would back me 1,000%, and they failed miserably. Okay? They have come to a point in their life when Campaign for Tobacco for Kids in 1998, right when the master settlement in this country, the billions of dollars being paid as punishment, you know, the Campaign for Tobacco for Kids, who I don't even know how they got to be the ones to speak for the American people. You know, they said back then that a broken promise, it's a broken promise to our kids and our children that we allow them to continuously be the target of the industry. That was in 1998. Now, 11 years later, in 2009, they are in cahoots with Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, and I know this for a fact, and their complicity by their denial is evident. Okay, they deny that they are involved, but that's their admission right there, because they have been a part of this whole process, and that was to say, hey, we will now monitor and manufacture all of this new statistical information, which is junk science, lies, to now make the American people believe that we have their best interests at heart. They've been lying from the get-go. Okay, and I want to say that. I want to put that out there, and I want people to hear that, and I want to be challenged on it. I want the opportunity to be able to go with a reporter and say, this is what they did. Now, we can't do it in a 22,000 or 20,000 page interview or 20,000 word interview. I know what they did, and I need to get this information out. They have lied. They are complicit with the tobacco industry, and the two people, the two organizations, American Legacy and Campaign, they are complicit with letting the tobacco companies off scot-free.
Well, all I can tell you is that my slant is different than anybody else's, so I can't say that I'm a part. I'm not a part of the tobacco control movement, but I helped build it. Now, how do you define that to people? You know, all I can say is that I'm sorry I got involved, obviously, because the friends who I thought were going to help make a difference and raise the level of awareness proportionate to the havoc that it wreaks, you know, are no longer my friends by their choice. I didn't do anything different. I haven't done a damn thing different than I did since 1989 when Peter Jennings and Harry Smith, and I went on CBS television and told my story, and I've said the same thing for the last 21 years. So, I mean, how do I get my story out there? Well, I guess unless somebody kidnaps me, Chris, you know, and have John Grisham write a story about me, you know John Grisham?
Of course, yeah.
Well, John, I am really, if you stop and think about it, I am really, you know, somebody like John Grisham's next Mitch McDeere or Rudy Baylor or Jake Trevance or, you know, Nicholas Easter. These are the characters in his books, you know, that I think if he had kept the movie Runaway Jury, you know, surrounding the tobacco company, we would have had a lot of different attitudes toward it. But he changed it in the movie from the tobacco lobby to the gun lobby. I don't know if you're aware of that. And you have to ask yourself a question. Well, why would he change it? How much pressure did he get to now do a movie that on a successful best-selling book about the tobacco industry? Then when it became a movie, they changed the whole villain. You know, yeah, and you got to ask yourself a question. Why? Why would he allow that to be changed? I mean, it's like writing the book Titanic, and the Titanic never sank. You know, let's tell a different story. Well, the truth of the matter is there's so much pressure on your end, on my end, on both sides of the fence with tobacco, but they're in cahoots together, Chris. I'm telling you that.
Right.
And I'm available to talk to you 100 times over this, you know, and clarify any questions that you have. And I know my story is not scientific or medical, but it's a moral thing with me, and it always has been a moral thing. It has been about kids. And I think, honestly, if you keep it about kids, in my particular perspective, that, you know, people won't tear me down. That's why nobody's been able to tear me down. They just stopped using me because they're afraid of what I'm going to say. You know, being politically insensitive is what I'm known for. You know, telling the truth when I do a keynote speech and I mention a governor who's been on the take in most cases by the tobacco lobby, or the governor is now a former tobacco lobbyist, and I go to that state and I mention their name, of course they're not going to want me back because it means somebody has to be accountable for bringing me in. And they're afraid of losing their job if it's in a school. So I try to pussyfoot around as much as I can until I get my foot in the door, and then I open my mouth, and then what comes out, I can't control anymore. You know, but to me, tobacco control, trying to understand it, is like being in a foreign country where nobody's speaking English. You know, I don't understand them. I can't even guess as to why they've taken this approach in the last 15 years when they had such an opportunity to create such a wonderful, wonderful health issue rather than a rights issue, and hateful, arrogant vindictiveness that I think will never, ever put tobacco control back on the map in a favorable light, even for people like me.
Right. And I think, as you said today, you know, I think probably money and extremism has got a lot to do with it. But as you say, you feel you're on the losing side, and perhaps you are. I hope someday that John Grisham writes your story. For the time being, you have to settle for me.
Okay.
And thank you very much for talking to me. And we'll speak again.
My pleasure, Chris. And anything I can do in the future, feel free to reach me.
Okay. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.